Stanford University.
Okay, well, welcome to lecture number 7, Stanford CS193P, fall 2017. So our primary topic today is combining MVCs to make bigger, more powerful applications, obviously. And then I'm going to do a big demo. It shows you how to do that. We're going to do it with concentration. We're going to add an MVC to that app. Then I'll come back to the slides and I'll talk about timer, which is a class that some of you used in the extra credit of the homework assignments. And then I'm going to dive into the next topic and try and get as far as I can, which is animation, which will be our topic on Wednesday. And I'll get into much more detail and do a big demo. But I want to kind of get in as far as I can today, just so we have more time for demo on Wednesday. All right, so combining MVCs. Remember this slide for when I talked about MVC? This is the MVCs working together. And we saw that when we have MVCs working together, these other MVCs, I'll get my thing under control here. Well, can't do it. Okay, these other MVCs down here in the corner, they serve as part of the view of another MVC. That's the way MVCs relate. Okay, an MVC is a view, part of the view of another class. And that has some ramifications for MVC. Most notably, it has to have blind structured communication back to the other MVC. But that's the way we structure it, and that keeps everything well contained and understandable. So we're going to talk about how we do that, how we make MVCs that are the view of other MVCs. Okay, so combining MVCs, we do this using some special controllers that iOS provides, whose view is other MVCs. Now, you could write your own special MVC whose view is other MVCs, but 99% of the time you're going to use one of the 3 that iOS provides, okay? And the 3 that iOS provides are TabBar controller, SplitView controller, and Navigation controller. Okay? Now, there are other ways to combine MVCs that we'll talk about later in the quarter, but this is the primary way that we're going to do it with these 3 MVCs. Okay? Those 3 right there, TabBar, SplitView, and Navigation controller, they are the controllers of MVCs. Okay? So let's look at them one by one. TabBar is by far the simplest one. You've seen this a million times. It's got a little, some tabs along the bottom there. You see those tabs, like a little orange thing, and the gray one's next to it. And each of those tabs, when you press it, shows another MVC. So you can already see that the TabBar controller's view includes the buttons at the bottom and another MVC. So this is what we mean by the view of this TabBar controller MVC is another MVC. The icon and the title that appears down in the TabBar, that's determined by which MVC is showing. Okay? In specific, UI ViewController has this var TabBar item. And the TabBar controller, when it shows an MVC as part of its view, it looks at that so it knows what the title and icon to display down at the bottom there. Okay, so it's all very object-oriented in that sense. So, for example, here we've got some sort of health-oriented API here, and we've got the 4 tabs at the bottom. By the way, if there's more than 4 tabs, more than 4 MVCs, it can show that. It'll show 5, and if there's 6, then the 5th one becomes a little more button, and you click it, and iOS provides an API, or UI rather, for the user to pick which tabs they want to be there at the bottom, or to pick some other tab that's not showing. Generally, though, we recommend no more than 5 MVCs in a TabBar controller. Okay, it's kind of just pretty good UI. It just starts to get a little complicated for the user if there's more than that. So in this case, this whole thing is 5 MVCs, the TabBar controller itself, and the 4 MVCs that serve as its view, and you just switch between them by clicking. Okay, so this is by far the easiest of the MVCs of MVCs. All right. Next, let's talk about SplitView controller, probably the second simplest one. It's only 2 MVCs in its view, and it puts them side by side with a very thin line in between them. So here's a little calculator app. It's got the calculator on the left, and then it's got maybe a graph of what's in the calculator on the right. And we call this MVC that's on the left, and it's usually smaller like this, the master in the SplitView controller, and we call the one on the right the detail. Okay, and we call them master and detail because usually what you do on the one on the left affects what happens on the right. It's the master, the detail is kind of a little bit of a slave. And of course, this is on iPad. Okay, it also works on iPhone Pluses, but not non-Plus iPhones. Okay, this little side-by-side mechanism. You can, of course, rotate your iPad, and when you rotate your iPad into portrait, now it'll only show the detail, except for you can slide out with your finger from the left and see the master, and then slide it back. Okay? Now, on an iPhone Plus in portrait, it acts like a normal iPhone. It doesn't have this slide out. Even an iPhone Plus is not quite wide enough to slide that thing out. Okay? So that's SplitView super, super easy. And then there's NavigationController. This is probably the most flexible, most powerful of the MVC of MVCs. You've seen this a million times in iOS apps. You can think of a NavigationController MVC as a deck of cards, okay? And each card is an MVC. And what the NavigationController does is let you put an MVC on top, obscuring all the ones below. And then if you hit the back button, it throws that one away and shows you the one that was there before. And you can keep going back and it keeps throwing the cards off the top. And you put new cards back on. So it's like a card stack where the stack are MVCs. And you can see that the NavigationController, as part of its view, it does actually draw a little bit. At the top, it draws a little title there, right? It says settings. Okay, that's not part of the MVC that's showing right there. But the contents that are in that title are driven by whatever MVC is on top of the card stack, the one that's showing. Okay, so that's called settings because the MVC that's there is the settings MVC. So it's being driven by what's there. And each MVC, similar with the TabBar item in the TabBar controller, there's a var in UI View Controller called navigation item, okay? And that contains things like the title and other buttons that you can put in the title bar, all kinds of stuff. You're going to want to go look at the documentation for navigation item and see what kind of things the navigation controller can do for you when your MVC is on top of the stack, okay? So if I then click on something, this is a table view here. We'll talk about table views next week or the week after. If I click on something here, then a new MVC slides in, animates in on top. Okay, now there's two cards on this stack. Okay, the all settings one, which is now behind, we can't see it, and this new one that's on top. Of course, oh, by the way, you can also have toolbar items at the bottom using the toolbar items bar of a view controller. So those toolbar items would come and go as new ones come on the stack. But also notice that when we have two things on there, a little back button appears in the upper left automatically. It even has the name of the one that's lower down on the stack of cards. And if you press that, of course, it's going to throw this card away, and we'll be back at the other card. But let's imagine I click on something in this one, like this accessibility thing. It puts a new card on there. That's the accessibility card. Maybe I click on something inside the accessibility card, like larger text, and it puts another one on. Now we have 4 MVCs on the stack. So there's a total of 5 MVCs here, the navigation controller itself, which is an MVC, and these 4 MVCs, which are part of its view. Okay? And of course, we know that we can back up. If we press the back button, it throws that card away. And it actually does throw the card away. It throws it out of the heap. Okay? So it's complete throw away. This card now gets thrown away, and we're just seeing the cards that are underneath until we go all the way back to the beginning. And now we're seeing the root card, the root view controller. This is called in Navigation Controller. All right, so everybody knows about Navigation Controller. You've seen it everywhere. Here's how Navigation Controller is working behind the scenes in terms of looking at it from an MVC standpoint. So let's say I have an MVC that's shown there, and I have more API or more UI than I can fit on my screen. So I need to go to another screen to do more UI, okay? That's the little thing in the corner right there. Well, to do that, I have to make another MVC that will control that UI. And then when I make my Navigation Controller to have them share the screen, the Navigation Controller comes up, and this is what its UI looks like. But as soon as you set a very important var in Navigation Controller, call its root view controller to be some MVC, then its view now includes the view of that MVC. Okay? And then if you interact with some button or something that's in that MVC's view, it can move to this other MVC, push it on the stack. Now the other MVC is still there. It's just kind of behind the scenes because it's lower on the stack. And a back button will automatically appear, as we saw. When we click this back, we move back to the other one, and notice that the MVC that we had originally added on there is gone. Okay? So it's very important to understand that as we use a navigation controller, usually when we put things on, we're creating a new one, and when we take things off, we're throwing it away. That is the normal operation of a navigation controller. Okay? It can be used in other ways, but that is its normal operation. Okay, so those are the 3 kinds of MVCs of MVCs. How do you get at them? Okay, it's really easy actually. Each of those 3 different kinds of MVCs has a var called ViewControllers. It's just an array of ViewController. So for a TabBar, it's just the ViewControllers, 1, 2, 3, 4, in order, I think, from left to right, the tabs. If it's a split ViewController, then ViewController sub 0 is the master, and ViewController sub 1 is the detail, or sometimes we say the first thing in the array is the master, and the last thing in the array is the detail. And if it's a navigation controller, then ViewController sub 0 is the root ViewController, and all the cards lined on top are the other ViewControllers in the array in order. So that's how you can get at all the ViewControllers that are in one of these MVCs of MVCs. Now, how do you get at the MVC of MVCs itself? How do you get to the navigation controller, the split view controller, whatever? Well, there's 3 awesome vars in UI view controller called TabBar controller, split view controller, and navigation controller, and they will tell you the TabBar controller you're in, or the split view controller you're in, or the navigation controller you're in. You might be in more than one, because you might be inside a navigation controller as the master in a split view controller, which might even be in a tab of a TabBar controller. So you could be in all 3 of these things, and this will return what you're in. And so this way you can kind of get at the other MVCs that are involved in whatever combination of MVCs you have, okay? So it's really good kind of access to things. Now, navigation controller, I want to just briefly tell you about the API for it. It has a method push view controller and pop view controller. Both can be animated. And that takes an MVC and puts it on the stack of cards, or pop view controller pops the top one off. Okay, so you can do that pushing and popping, but we don't usually do it that way. We usually use what are called segues, okay, which I'm going to talk about in a moment here. All right, so how do we wire all this stuff in our storyboard up? Okay, how do we get these navigation controllers and split view controllers and TabBar controllers all hooked up to our MVCs? Okay, well, of course, we do it with control drag in Interface Builder. We do everything with control drag, right? Constraints, outlets, actions, all this stuff with control drag, and we use control drag to do this as well. So let's look at the example of a split view controller, okay? If I wanted to have a couple of MVCs and set them as the master and the detail in a split view controller, I would just drag out a split view controller from the same place I get a button or something. It'll come with a bunch of extra VCs, by the way. View controllers kind of that it comes with for fun or for free. I'm not sure why it does it. We usually almost always just delete them. And then we control drag from the split view controller to our master, and we control drag to our detail. Same thing with the TabBar controller. We drag it out, and then we just control drag to each of the MVCs in there. Navigation controller is a little bit different, and I'll show you that in a moment. So this is what it looks like approximately in Interface Builder. Here's the calculator again. I dragged out a split view controller there on the left. I just control drag to the master. I choose master view controller from the thing that pops up. I control dragged it to the other one. I choose detail. Bam, I've got a wired up split view controller right there. Couldn't be simpler. Okay? Now, the split view can really only do its thing fully on an iPad, because there's just not enough screen real estate on other devices to really do this side-by-side thing, especially the portrait mode slide out thing. There's just not enough room there. So what we often do is wrap the master in a navigation controller. And when we do that, then the system can show it in a navigation controller on an iPhone and in a split view controller on an iPad. It'll automatically adapt, that's the word we use to describe that, to the environment it's in. So that makes it really easy for us to build UIs that work on both. They work on iPads, they work on iPhones. Okay, same exact storyboard. So here's what that looks like. So here's my split view with my master and my detail there, and we're looking at the master. And I'm selecting it, and I'm going to the menu, and I'm saying Editor, Embed in Navigation Controller. So instead of dragging a navigation controller out, which I could do, by the way, and just control drag them up, but instead of dragging it out, you can actually do this Embed in Navigation Controller, and it will insert a Navigation Controller MVC in as the master, and make my previous thing that was the master be its root view controller. So now I have a navigation controller wrapping around the master of my split view. Okay? This also has the nice benefit, it puts a title on your master, which is often nice to have a title of your master of your split view. Now you can, one thing to notice about this, of course, is that now the master of your split view is no longer the calculator, it's a navigation controller. So if you actually wanted to get at the calculator, you would have to get the master and then look at the master's root view controller to find the calculator there. By the way, you can also put the detail, wrap it in a navigation controller. The only reason you would ever want to do that is to give it a title bar. Okay, okay, because you always navigate from the master. That's why it's called the master. So you can do it, but again, if you do that, make sure when you look at the detail, if you find that it's a navigation controller, you need to look inside and see the thing that's inside of it, the root view controller. Or you can also use visible view controller on a navigation controller. That'll tell you the card that's on the top, that's visible. All right, so that's how we wire up SplitView's navigation controller together. How do we make it so that when we click something in a view, it causes some card to slide on, or it causes the detail of our split view to change, right? We're doing the calculator, we enter some equation, we press the graph button. Well, on the iPhone, we want to slide a graph in front on the stack, and on the iPad, we want to replace the detail view with a graph of what's in my current calculator. So how do we do that? We do that with what's called segues. Okay? A segue just makes a brand new MVC, always a new MVC. I'm going to say that 3 or 4 times so that it sinks in. Always a new MVC. It makes it and puts it on the top of the stack or puts it in the right side of a split view controller. So here are the kinds of segues that exist. There's a show segue. That's the kind of segue that works in a navigation controller. Okay? That causes the new MVC to be put on top of a stack. If you're not inside a navigation controller, you probably shouldn't be doing a show segue. Then there's show detail. That works in a split view. Okay? So show detail will replace the right side of the split view. Then there's modal and popover, which I'm going to talk about later in the quarter. Modal takes over the entire screen. Okay, so forget about any navigation controllers or split view controllers or TabBar controllers. It takes over the entire screen and just fills the screen with the MVC. We generally try to avoid modal because it puts the app in this kind of stuck state where only the MVC that you've taken over the screen with is active. Can be kind of disconcerting for the user, but sometimes we do want things to be modal. And then popover segue is kind of like a modal segue, but instead of taking over the whole screen, it just puts it up in a little popover. You've seen that on iPad especially, but it's still modal because the background is grayed out and you can't interact with it. You can only do the thing in the popover. So we'll talk about those segues later in the quarter. Today I'm just going to talk about show and show detail. So this is in red. Whenever you see red on a slide, you know it's important. I'm just re-emphasizing that segues always create a new instance of the MVC. Okay? Segues always create a new instance of the MVC. This is important to understand. You're not going to be reusing some MVC that you had on screen before. And we'll show in our demo today what we can do about this if we really do want reuse of MVCs. Okay? By the way, the back button in a navigation controller is not a segue. That's just part of the navigation controller. So when you go back, you're not creating a new MVC. You're going back to the one that was on the stack underneath. All right, so how do we make these segues happen? Control drag. We do control drag for everything, okay? It can also be done in code as well, and I'll show you how to do that in the demo too. So if I have this calculator example, here's my split view with the navigation controller around the master, and I've got a button in my calculator which is show me a graph of what's currently in the calculator. I just control drag from that button down to the lower left here to my detail, okay? And when I let go of the control drag, a little black window is going to come up, and there it is in more detail, and it will choose the show detail segue there. Okay? And that will create this little line. See the line that it created right there? Which we can click on and inspect. And that little line is called a segue. So that's a thing in your storyboard that you can inspect. And why do you want to inspect that little line? Mostly because you want to give it a unique identifier, which is just a string. So I'm going to call this one, for example, show graph, because that's what this segue does. And then in my code, I can refer to that segue by the name, show graph. Everything in Interface Builder files, all these storyboards, is always referenced by name. And the great thing about that is that you can copy and paste things from one storyboard to another, and as long as the names in your code are the right names, it'll just work. So that's why it goes by name. Okay? It does everything by name. Some people think it kind of can be a little annoying that you have to have these names that are exactly the same in the code and in the storyboard, but it turns out to be quite a flexible thing to do it that way. A little more work for the programmer to ensure that those things are the same, but kind of worth it in flexibility, I think. All right, so that's the main thing you want to inspect. You can see you can also inspect whether it's show detail or show, but you're going to see that in my demo, you actually don't want to change that show detail to show right there. You're better off creating a new segue. Okay, so that's segues. So that identifier, why do we want it? Where would we use it in our code? What's an example? Well, one way is you can perform a segue from code. So manually cause a segue to happen. Okay, well, to do that, you need to know which segue it is in the storyboard that you want to perform manually, and so you can do perform segue. We don't usually perform manually. I'll show it in the demo. We don't usually do it that often, okay, because the real way we do it is just the control dragging, and that's going to automatically segue from that button, so we don't need to do it from code. But the most important use of identifier is to prepare the MVC that you're segueing to. Okay, think about the calculator example. I press graph, and it's going to show me a graph. Presumably it's going to show me a graph of what's in my calculator. Well, I have to somehow let that new graphing MVC know what equation to graph. We call that preparing that MVC to do its job. And segues always create a new MVC, so they always have to be prepared to do what they do. Make sense? So we do that with a function called prepare for segue. This function is implemented in the MVC that is causing the segue to happen. Okay? It's obviously the only one who could prepare the new MVC to be ready to go. This is what that method looks like, prepare for segue. It has two arguments. The segue, which is a UI storyboard segue, that segue mostly just has the identifier and also the MVC that we need to prepare, right? The MVC that it just created that we're going to segue to. The second argument there, the sender, that's the button or the line in a table view, or if you're doing it from code, it could be almost anything. That's why it's of type any that caused this segue to happen. That could also be nil. Okay, it's happening. You don't know or care who did it. Okay, so that's what those two arguments are. All right, now let's dive into this thing. The first thing we usually do is take a look at our identifier, our segue identifier, which could be nil. Okay, it shouldn't be. You always want to set an identifier in your storyboard. But we look at it, and here I'm going to switch on it, although we can use if-then on it, and find out which segue it is. And that's because an MVC could have multiple different buttons, each that segue to a different kind of MVC. So we obviously have to prepare them differently. So we need to know which one is which. Okay, so that's why we check the identifier to see which segue we're talking about. Then we need to get the MVC that we are segueing to and prepare it. Okay, well, segue.destination, that var segue, that var destination in the segue object that's passed to you, that is the ViewController that you're segueing to, the brand new, just created MVC, right? But the type of that argument is not going to be a graph controller or something like that. It's going to be just UI ViewController. That's because segue, UI storyboard segue class, its var has to have a type, and it can't know anything about a graph. It was written by Apple years ago, okay? So it's of type UI ViewController. So that means we have to use as, right, the typecasting, to downcast it to the kind of MVC controller we think this is, based on which segue it is. So in this case, it's the calculator case. I think it's a graph controller that controls one of these graphing things, and so I'm going to downcast it. Now, if that fails, then obviously I can't prepare it. So that's why I do if-let there. Okay? But if it doesn't fail, then now I can set properties in the graph controller, call methods, whatever's necessary to get it to know what function to graph so that it can do its job. Okay? We prepare it. Cool, everybody? Make sense? It's very important to understand prepare for segue. You just can't do any multiple MVC stuff without understanding this method. It's the most important method in all of multiple MVCs. All right? Now, red again. Look, some red on the slide. It is absolutely crucial to understand that when you are executing these yellow lines, you're preparing that MVC. When that's happening, that MVC's outlets have not been set yet. So all those outlets, like in our concentration, the card buttons, the flip count, all those labels, they're all nil. Okay? Now they're implicitly unwrapped optionals, but they're still going to get unwrapped when you try to access them. Okay? This will cause many crashes in your apps because you'll forget, oh, oops, and during preparing I accidentally accessed one of my outlets. Especially since when you're preparing, you kind of want the outlets because you're trying to, prepare the UI. But you have to get used to this fact that this happens before. I'm not sure why they made the decision to do this, but it can be a pain. Sometimes when you prepare, the MVC that you're preparing is just collecting the information, and then in its viewDidLoad, which is a function, remember, that we know is called after our outlets are hooked up, then you talk to the outlets and parcel out the information or whatever. Okay? So it can be annoying, but I'll intentionally crash in the demo just so you can see this happening. Because it will happen to you. All right? So that's prepare for segue. You can prevent a segue from happening with this method should perform segue in UI ViewController. Okay, you get the identifier. If you return false from this, then the segue will not happen. So someone clicked on that graph button, the system looks at this method. If it says no, then it will not segue to a new graph controller. It's just like you never even clicked on that button. Okay? This is pretty rare to do, but occasionally you might want to do it. All right, so let's see a demo of all this stuff. I'm probably going to show you all this stuff in here. I think we have time for all of that. Yeah, we probably do. All right, so let's head back over to our concentration. So what I'm going to do here, this is concentration as we left it off last time. I'm going to change it to have multiple MVCs. The new MVC I'm going to add is a theme chooser. Okay, remember how you all in your homework added theme to your concentration game? You did, but it chose a random theme. Okay, so I'm going to add a theme mechanism to mine, a simple one because it's a demo. But I'm going to have another MVC that lets me choose the theme. Okay, so let's do that. Let's start by, okay, one thing I want to do in here after I've been putting off, but I want to do is, now that I have multiple MVCs, I do not want any of my MVCs to have their controller called ViewController. Okay, that's just way too generic. Okay, I'm going to have multiple MVCs. I want each one to have the class that controls it be, you know, nicely named. So here I'm going to go, oops, ViewController here, and I'm going to rename this. And the way to rename this, you can't just type in a new name here, because this also appears in the storyboard by name. Everything in the storyboard is by name. So the way to rename here is to do the special command click. Remember that menu? And choose rename. And then Xcode will go and look at all the places that is used. And now I'll just type in. I'm going to call this my concentration view controller because it's the view controller that controls this view controller right here, my concentration game. All right? Okay, so let's go and add this theme support to my app. I'm going to do it super simply. Here's where all my emoji stuff is. I'm just going to add a var called theme, which I'm going to have be an optional string, which is one of these. Okay, so my theme, when you set my theme, you just set the emoji you want, and that is the theme. Okay, so like this would be the Halloween theme if we passed it in here. When its did set happens, I'm just going to reset my emoji choices to equal this theme. By the way, this is an optional. It's going to start out nil, and if you set it to nil, then I'll just have no emoji as your theme, in which case you're going to end up getting this question mark, if you'll remember, if you don't have any emoji. And then I'm also going to reset the emoji that we have used so far because it might be from a different theme. So I'm going to reset it. And by the way, all I need to do to create an empty dictionary is that, because Swift is going to be able to infer the type from this, so I don't need to put card and string in here. And finally, what if someone sets my theme and I'm in the middle of a game? I think I better update my view from my model. Okay, remember update view from model, so that whatever is showing, if it's got the wrong theme, will update to my new theme. Okay, so that's it. That's how I'm going to do my theme. It's really simple, probably a little too simple. Another thing I'm going to do is that since we now let the theme be set, I really don't want this Halloween color theme here. So I'm going to change these, all these things to be a more kind of standard color. Blue is this default blue right here is probably one of the most standard colors. So let's make everything here be blue. I'll have to change it in my code as well. Easy to change here. All right, and then the background doesn't want to be black. That's very unusual. We're going to make that white. And then our flips down here wants to be black, just standard color black. It's black. There it is. Okay, so now our UI looks a little more standard color. Let's go do the same thing in our code over here. Concentration view controller. See, we've got these colors here. So this orange right here, which is the back of the cards, we'll make that blue. We don't want the card's background to be white since our overall background is white, so I'll just make it be light gray so we can see the edges of the cards better. And then also we have our flip count label. We'll make that be black. Okay, so I've added the theme. I've changed my color scheme. Let's just run and make sure I haven't broken anything here, okay, before we dive in. Okay, so we got this blue theme, And we got the Halloween default, kind of our default theme. Looks like it is functioning properly. We're even getting our outline font, and we got normal colors here. Okay, so now let's go and add this other MVC, right? We've got this MVC. We need another one. How do we add an MVC to our app? Well, we just go over here, same place that we get a button or a label from. The very top one is ViewController. I just drag it out and drop it in. So now I have two MVCs, okay? Two ViewControllers here. We call these things, by the way, each one of these things, a scene. S-C-E-N-E, scene. Okay? So we got these two ViewControllers right here, two MVCs. And a couple of things I need to do here. One is every time I have a ViewController, it needs a ViewController subclass to control it. This one has one, concentration ViewController. We need to make one for here. And I do that with file, new file. That's always how I create a new class. And it's a UI thing, so I'm going to do Cocoa Touch class. It's a subclass of UI ViewController. I'm going to call this my concentration theme chooser ViewController. Nice long name right there. Won't have to type it very much though. And I'm going to make sure not to put it at the level of my project. I'm going to put it down a level where all my files are there. And here we go. This is our ViewController. We're going to get rid of these ViewController lifecycle methods like we always do. And that leaves us with this one method, all important, prepare for segue. So we will get back to prepare for segue there and implement it quite soon. But the first thing we need to do is the same thing you did when you dragged out a blank UI view. What did you do? You went to the identity inspector over here, right? And you changed its identity to be your custom subclass. So we want to do the same thing here. So I'm going to select this guy. I'm going to go here to the identity inspector. I'm going to change it from being just generic UI ViewController to being my concentration theme chooser ViewController. Okay, don't forget that step. If you don't do that step, then your prepare for segue, for example, will never get called. You won't be able to create any outlets or any actions or anything, okay? You need to do that. Another thing I'm going to do is this little arrow. You see this arrow right here? This is the arrow that says, when this app runs, which ViewController do I show first? Okay? And obviously now I want to show the theme one first. So you can just pick this up and drag it to whatever MVC you want to be the first one. All right, so here's my theme chooser right here. If we were really doing this for real, this would probably be a table view or some extensible list of themes that I could add more themes to with one line of code like you were asked to do in your homework. But I haven't taught you table view yet, so I can't do it that way. Instead, I'm just going to have 3 buttons, each of which is a theme. Okay? So I'm just going to grab 3 buttons here and make this nice UI to this MVC. We'll make the font nice and big so you can see it. Go over here, maybe 40 points or something like that. And we need 3 of them, so I'll copy and paste, and then paste another one. Okay, so the 3 themes that I have a sports theme, I have a faces theme, and I have an animals theme. So these are my themes. Let's do a quick review of auto layout. I'm going to select these and put them in a stack with this button down here, embed in stack view. Here they are. I'm going to make them be centered in the stack, and I'm going to make them the equal size. And I'm going to pick a standard spacing, like that. I'm also going to put this in the center and do my control drag to my outer level and have the center horizontal and vertical there. Notice I get the yellow, okay? That yellow is just warning me that these frames will be different at runtime. I can fix that in the document outline, if you'll recall, this little guy right here with this yellow button in the upper right. And go here and then click on anything that's yellow, and it can fix the misplacement for me by updating the frame. So we'll do that. It moved it slightly, and now everything is resolved. Okay, so this is great. I got my nice UI here. I've got auto layout, so it should work when I rotate and do all those things. So now all I need to do is wire these 2 MVCs up. Okay, make it so that when I click on one of these buttons, it shows this MVC over here on the right. And I do that with control drag. So I'm just going to control drag from the sports button over here. I'm going to put this in a navigation controller to start anyway. So I'm going to pick show here, not show detail, which is for split views. I'm going to pick show. Okay, let's do the same thing with this one. That's also going to be a show. And this one here, also a show. So they're all going to show. And I want to make sure to click on each of them. It's nice, it shows you what's causing the segue here. And go over here to the inspector and change the identifier. What does segue do? It basically lets you choose a theme. So I'm going to call this choose theme. And I'm going to call all three of them identified with choose theme because all three of them do exactly the same thing. They choose a theme. All right? Now I'm going to do something kind of bad. In fact, not kind of bad, very bad, which is I'm going to look at the button that caused the segue to decide which theme to show. Can anyone think of why that would be really bad? Should never do that. No guesses? Because what happens when I convert this to French or Chinese? Am I going to have my code have to have French and Chinese in it so that it works in those languages? No, makes no sense. So you never really want to drive your code from something that's in the UI, because the UI is going to be in 40 different languages, you hope, if your app is successful. But for demos, it's really good because it's very little code, and I can do it quickly. So this is demoware. Do not copy this aspect of what we're doing today. All right, so we've created these segues right here. Let's go ahead and run and see. Oh, wait, one more thing we have to do. We're missing an MVC. We've got the first card on our stack, the second card of our stack, but we don't have the stack itself. We never have put a navigation controller, which we could get from here, by the way. If you go down and look here, right here, navigation controller, I could just drag it out and then control drag to wire it up. But I'm going to use that embed that I was telling you about, so I'm just selecting this view controller and doing editor, embed in navigation controller. Boop. Now we have 3 MVCs here. Okay, the navigation controller, the first card on the stack, and then the one that we're going to push onto the stack. Okay, pretty cool with that? All right, so now let's run. And notice it automatically moved the arrow when I embedded that, which is kind of nice. So let's hope this works. See what happens. All right, here's our UI. All right, okay, it came into the right space at least, which is our chooser. Let's see if when we choose one of these themes, if it will segue to that other MVC. Okay, in fact, let's move it out of the way so we can see what's going on here. Ready, go. Woohoo! It did it. But the theme is Halloween. Okay, how about animals? Oh, still Halloween. Okay, so of course this is still Halloween because we never did anything to actually prepare that MVC to be one of these themes, right? We just put the name here. We didn't actually do the prepare. So our next step is to prepare this MVC that gets put on to the top of the stack of cards to have the right theme. So we're going to prepare that. So let's go do that. And we do that in the code of the concentration theme chooser view controller, right? That's the controller that we're choosing the theme. So let's uncomment out this all-important function right here and get rid of the comments. And we got to implement prepare. So what do we have to do to implement prepare? Well, the first thing, as I talked about before, is we're going to check to see which segue we're doing. Now, we only have one kind of segue, so let's check for it. If the identifier equals the choose theme segue, that's what we put in the inspector, remember, in the storyboard. Then we want to see if we can find the concentration game MVC and prepare it by telling it its theme. Okay? So let's get the theme. How are we going to get the theme? Well, to speed things up here, I actually created a little code snippet here that creates this dictionary. Okay, so this dictionary has just got the name of the theme, which is the same as the button titles. That's what I'm saying is bad design. And then the theme itself. All right, so there's sports, there's a bunch of animals, there's a bunch of faces. Okay, so we want to get that theme. So we're going to get the name of the theme from the button. That's this sender argument. The sender is the thing causing this segue. So we want to say something like, if we can let the theme name equal the sender's current title, then we're going to get the theme from that. But this we can't do because sender, what type is sender? It's of type any, optional any, in fact. You can't send an optional any, the method current title. That's a button method. Okay? So we're going to have to use as. Anytime we see any, we're almost always going to have to use as. So I'm going to say if I can let button equal the sender as a UI button, then I can do this theme name thing because I now have a var, this button, which is of type button, UI button. All right? So now I can say button.currentTitle. Okay, so you see how we used as to resolve that any right there? Okay, now that we have the theme name, I can say if I can let the theme equal my themes sub theme name, then I'm ready to go to prepare. Right, and we're just looking at this themes is this. Okay, so I'm looking it up, and we know that that can fail, of course, because maybe this theme name is not in this dictionary. So that's why we if let. By the way, these two if lets are so related to each other, we would almost certainly go up here and put them on the same line with a comma. Okay, because they really, really go together. By the way, we probably wouldn't do this line either. We'd take this and put it right here. Okay, in fact, I'll show you how to do that. So instead of creating a separate var here, I would just take this right here out of that, get rid of this, put parentheses around this. Since this could return nil, I need to optional chain it. Okay, and now I can get rid of all this. Okay, this is how we would write this code right here. We wouldn't have all those extra if-lets. We try to make this concise because this all has to do with the same thing, which is getting this theme. Okay, if you didn't understand what I did right here, ask on Piazza, go to TA, go back and do your reading assignment. This is important to understand what's going on here. All right, so I got this, now I've got the theme. Now I need to prepare the destination. So I'd like to say something like segue.destination, set your theme to be this theme. Oops, not that theme, this theme, okay? But I can't do that either. Because again, this segue destination, let's look at the type of this segue destination. Option, click on it. It's of type UI ViewController. And of course, UI ViewController does not have the var theme, so we can't do that. So we have to say here, use as, and say if we can let CVC, concentration ViewController, equal the segue destination as downcasted to a concentration ViewController, now we can prepare this thing by setting its theme. Okay? Everyone see that? See how we're using as to downcast? Super important to understand that. So now, that's it. We have successfully prepared this thing. Okay? So let's go run our app, see how it works. Okay? Hopefully, sports. Oh no, what's going on? Oh, my app crashed. Why did my app crash? No. Let's take a look and see if we can find out here. It says, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Okay, and here's my call stack here on the left. And it looks like card buttons here. Uh-oh, my outlet to all my card buttons is nil. Let's make sure that's true. PO card buttons, nil. Oh no. So let's go back up the call stack and see how we got here. Okay, so we're in update view from model. That got called from setting the theme, because when we set our theme, we update the view from model. And that theme setting got called from preparing. So the preparing is work. It's trying to prepare it and setting the theme. But when it sets the theme, it calls update the view from model, which tries to access the card buttons, which is nil because of that red on the slide, which is that your outlets are not set when you're preparing. Okay, so what do we do about this? Okay. Unfortunately, even though this is an implicitly unwrapped optional, we're going to have to check and see if card buttons does not equal nil. And if card buttons does not equal nil, then we can update our view from our model. But if it's not nil, then if it's nil, then we simply just can't do this. Now, hopefully, somewhere later in our code, either in view.did_load, or in our case, when someone touches a card, update view from model happens. Okay? And so everything's going to be fine, because all the cards are face down until someone touches one, so we're good to go. Okay, so it's very important to understand. You've got to protect your code that can be called when your MVC is being prepared. Okay, now let's try again. Let's try sports. All right, it's segued. Let's cross our fingers that these are sports related, and they are. Excellent, and the game is working just fine. Okay, let's go back. We're going to hit back. When I hit back, that sports game got thrown away. So now when I pick animals and go forward, look, brand new MVC. Okay, game started over. And it's animals, so that's good. Go back over here, faces, brand new MVC. Segueing always creates a brand new MVC. This is a very good example of that happening. All right. Okay, Now let's do iPad. This is the first time we've done iPad in this course, and you're going to be doing it from here on out, and you're going to have to do it in your next assignment. So let's do this. Let's take the app that we have right now and see what it would look like in our storyboard on an iPad. So here we're looking at it in iPhone 10 view here. I'm just going to switch over and look at it as an iPad. And you can see that as an iPad, it's really large, so maybe I want to zoom out a little bit so I can see it a little better. And this UI doesn't look very good. Okay? Look at all this extra white space around. If I had an iPad app and it looked like this, I'd be like, this is a terrible design. And it's kind of a waste because we really would like a split view where this is on the left and this is on the right. That would be a much more effective use of the space, especially in landscape. Okay? Imagine this in landscape with this part on the left and this on the right. That would be really good use of space there. Okay? So that's what we want to do. How are we going to do that? Of course, we need a split view controller for that. Now, I recommend anytime you add a split view controller to your app that you zoom way out, okay, really, really far out. And that's because when you go over here to grab one of these split views and you get all those extra views that are going to come with it, it's going to be really big. See? So it's nice to have your scale be small. So I'm going to drop this in here, and you can see this has dropped the split view controller here, and then it gave me a navigation controller and a master and a detail. Okay? I don't want any of those things. So I'm just going to select them and delete. All right? Because I already have my master. It's right here, and I have my detail right here. Okay? So let's move this up. If I can grab a hold, it's so small. So we can do that. And I'm even going to move my detail right here. If I can grab it. It's hard to get a hold of it when it's small. Over to here so that I can easily control drag. So let's zoom back in now that we've collected everything here. Get that out of there. And two things I want to do. One, I want to get this arrow to be here on the split view controller so that my app starts with the split view controller. Doesn't start with the master showing. Then I'm just going to control drag to my master and choose master view controller right here. And then I'm going to control drag to my detail and choose detail view controller. Now notice I still have these segues right here. Okay, so my master, when I'm clicking these, is still trying to segue to this view controller. So let's just run on an iPhone, on an iPad rather, and see if this works on iPad. We put it in a split view. Let's just try it. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so here's my iPad. Woohoo! It looks like it's working, right? We got our master on the left. We got our game here on the right. Okay, looking good. Let's go ahead and choose a theme. Oh, oops. That's not good. That's not what we want. Look at that. Okay, now why is that happening? Okay, when I choose this, I want this over here to change to a new sports game. Okay, why am I getting it in here? Well, that's because of the type of these segues. You see these segues? They're all show segues. Show segues mean do the navigation controller's trick. I want show detail, also known as replace, because it replaces the detail view of your split view. Now, you might think, oh, let's just change it. Boop, we changed it. Okay, this, there is a bug in Interface Builder. This does not work. Okay, so do not try to just change your kind here. I'm not sure under what circumstances it doesn't work, but it often does not work. So what we're going to do is delete them. I'm just selecting them all and hitting delete. Okay, and I'm going to rewire them up. It's a simple matter to rewire them up. And this time I'm going to choose show detail. It lets me show you wiring it and hitting show detail, which is kind of a nice side effect. I'm going to wire all three of these up, and which is not that bad, but unfortunately I also have to inspect them all right here and put the identifier back in, choose theme for all three. And you can see that all three of them are of kind show detail now, right? Show detail, show detail, show detail. So now when we run, it's going to work. Okay, here we go. Cross our fingers. Ready? So we got this is the Halloween style. And sports. Now again, it created a new game, hopefully, with sports. Okay? Animals. New game with animals. Okay? Now, real question here is, did we break the iPhone version here? Because we did a lot of iPad work here. We added this split view, which we know doesn't work on an iPhone, at least not an iPhone Plus. Okay? And we changed these segues to be show detail. okay, and the iPhone can't show split view, so it can't show detail. Did this break everything? And the answer is no, okay, because iOS is really smart, and it knows that this structure of having a split view with the navigation controller inside it, even with show detail things, that when we're on the iPhone, this means do it all in a navigation controller, okay? So this is called adapting to a different trait collection, okay? And we'll talk all about that when we talk more about auto layout. But here's our UI appearing here. One thing that's interesting to notice here, it didn't come up showing the themes. It came up showing a game with the default theme. Now I can go back and choose a theme, and it worked, okay? But interestingly, it comes up, when it first comes up, it comes up with this default theme. And that's just a decision they made. Some apps want this, some apps don't. I guess Apple figured this is the most common one. In our example, we don't want that. We would want it coming up with this, right? So if we have time in our demo, we'll fix that. Okay? To do that, we have to become the split views delegate. So it's a little bit of complicated work. Code's not complicated, but being a delegate, you guys have not seen much of yet. So we would have to do that. But otherwise, notice that it's working just fine. Okay, and notice that in landscape on an iPhone, it does not do the side-by-side split view thing. It just uses the whole screen. However, on an iPhone Plus, like let's look at the iPhone 8 Plus and run it there. On Pluses, it does do the split view. You see, this is doing the split view here, faces, sports. Okay, so it's doing the split view here. But in portrait mode, it does navigation controller. See, look, there's a back button. I can't slide out from the left. When I pull from the left, it goes back in the navigation controller. So an iPhone Plus, iPhone 8 Plus, iPhone 7 Plus, those are kind of hybrid devices, halfway between an iPad and an iPhone. All right, let's take this one step further and put this whole thing in a TabBar controller, just so you can see what that looks like. Again, really easy. I'm going to zoom way out again. Anytime I drag these view controllers out, they bring a bunch of extra junk. So here's a TabBar controller. I just drag it out. Here it is. It brings it out. I don't know if you can see it, but it actually gave me two little blank view controllers right there, which I'll go ahead and leave. I'll just leave them there so that it has 3 tabs total. So let's see if we can get a hold of this and drag it up here. So I'm going to leave these 2 that it brought out as tabs, and then I'm going to control drag to my split view to make it be relationship view controller here. That's how you add it. It's not a segue. It's just adding it as a view controller right there. And we can zoom in, see what it did there. Okay, here's my TabBar controller. If you zoom in, you can see it says TabBar controller right there. And of course, I want to move this little arrow to here, so it starts in the TabBar controller. You can set the attributes about that the little tab has here in the storyboard if you want. You see right here, if you click on it, like this is my concentration game, so I can say concentration. These ones that it added down here, let's see what it has for them. Maybe we'll just leave it. It has item 1 and item 2 are the 2 things it has. We'll just leave it like that. And you can click on these and not just set the name that it uses. Where are we? See, when you're zoomed in, it's hard to find where the heck you are. So that's why we often zoom way out. Okay, so we can also click on this thing and set things like the image. By the way, this image that goes in a TabBar item, okay, it's an alpha-only image. So all the drawing you do is either with transparent pixels or opaque ones. And if they're transparent, then kind of iOS is going to shine light through those transparent pixels, and that's what's going to show up as your TabBar. The other thing you can do that's kind of cool is you can reorder the tabs. So here I've got my 3 tabs, item 1, item 2. Let's move our concentration one to be the leftmost tab. Okay, so let's run again. We'll do it on an iPhone 8 Plus, doesn't really matter. Okay, here we go. You can barely see these tabs on the bottom. I don't know if it helps make it any bigger, but there they are. There's the concentration tab. Here's item 1 tab. There's item 2. They're blank. If we go back to concentration, we still have our full UI here. Okay, it's just in a tab right there. And same thing if we rotate. We've got the 3 tabs here. Okay, so that's TabBar controller. Really, really simple. Okay, let's talk about another little bit wonky thing with this app that we have. I'm going to run it on the iPad again. And just note that it does, well, actually, before I do that even, I'm going to do one other thing, which is let's show you how to make a segue from code. Okay, so the segues that we have here are just directly from these buttons. Like if I click on a segue, it's directly from a button to the MVC. There is a way to make it so that you do this perform segue business in code with that perform segue line. So to show that, I'm going to delete these segues. So now the buttons no longer segue, and instead I'm going to segue from code. And I'm going to do that by changing these buttons. Instead of being seguers, they're going to do target action. So let's just bring them up here, zoom in a little bit, and just do our normal target action. So this is nothing different than you've been doing target action all quarter long. I'm just going to control drag from the button here and create an action. I'm going to call this action change theme because that's what it's going to do. Just for fun, you know, this is where you usually, I say, set this to UI button or else. Well, actually now you don't need to set that to UI button or else because you know how to deal with any. So I'm going to connect this with any as the argument. Okay, the sender, instead of being UI button, it's any, and you know how to deal with that now. Okay, you didn't before, but now you know with the as you can deal with that. And let's put them at, we'll have all three buttons. Send this same thing right here. So I'm going to put a choose theme segue in here, but it's not going to be from a particular button. It's just going to be a segue from this view controller to this view controller. Okay, so it's kind of like a generic segue between these two. So how do you create a segue like that? Well, you control drag like a buttons, but instead of control dragging from some UI element, you control drag from this little round yellow thing. You see that? It says concentration theme controller. This right here represents this MVC. It's the thing you can use to drag from or to mean this MVC. So I'm going to control drag from here to here. Okay, it's going to be show detail because we're in a split view context. I'm going to go here and still give it a name, the same name, choose theme. And now I've created a segue between this view controller and this view controller, not between these buttons. You see when I click on these buttons, or if I click on this, it's not selecting these buttons, it's selecting the whole view controller. Okay, so this is how you do a manual segue. You create a segue between the two view controllers, and then in your code, you just say perform segue with that theme name. So if we do this, it will do exactly the same thing, right? So here we have our Halloween, we hit sports, now we get a sports one. So that's just another way to do segues. Now, why would I ever do this? Okay, why would I do this in code when it was so easy to just go straight from the buttons? Well, you do it whenever you want conditional segueing, okay, where you may or may not want to segue here. Now, you can also use that should perform segue method to conditionally segue, but I'm going to show you how we can do conditional segue right here, a really good example of it. So let's go back, let's go back to our iPad Pro that we had running here. And I'm going to put a cool feature in here, which is if I'm in the middle of a game and I hit sports, it's not going to replace this. Okay? It's going to actually change the theme on the fly and not reset the game. Okay? Wouldn't that be kind of a better UI here? We don't really want to start a new game every time we change the theme. So if I'm going to do that, I cannot segue. Do you see why I can't segue and do that? Because segue always creates a new MVC. So there's no way for me to segue and keep this MVC like it is. So I have to do this in code instead. So in change theme here, instead of segueing, I'm going to look in my split view controller and find this little view controller over here and talk to it directly. Just going to talk to it. I'm not going to segue to it. I'm going to see if I can find it. And if I find it there, I'm just going to talk to it and tell it to change its theme. Okay, so how am I going to do that? So now I'm going to put that code back that I deleted, okay, this theme name here. And if I have a theme, then inside here, okay, inside this thing, I'm going to talk to the detail of my split view. So this is going to be a thing where if I'm in a split view and I can find my detail, I'll just talk to it and tell it the theme. Otherwise, I'll do the perform segue. So that's what I mean about conditional perform segues here. So I'm going to find that split view controller by saying if let CVC equal, and then I'm going to create a little var, which is my split view detail concentration view controller, which might be nil if I can't find it. Okay? So I'm going to do that, and then if I can find that, then I'll get the theme and set the CVC's theme equal to this theme. Shouldn't I call that theme? There we go. Like that. Okay? Else, I will perform segue. So everyone see what I'm doing here? So I just have to implement this. This is just going to be a var that finds my split view detail controller as a concentration view controller. So that's going to be a private var called this. paste. It's going to be of type concentration view controller. Optional though, because I might not be able to find it. And I'm just going to return the split view controller I'm in, if any, dot its view controllers, which is the master and an array of the master of the detail, right? Dot last, which should be the detail, as a concentration view controller. So if all the optional chaining and the as make it through here, then I was able to find a concentration view controller in my split view controller's detail. See what I'm doing there? Okay, and if I'm able to do that, then I'll set the theme here. So let's see if this works. All right, here we go. Let's try. So we've got our Halloween theme here. That's great. Now I'm going to hit sports. Hopefully it will not reset the game because it'll hopefully find this concentration view controller. Woohoo! It just reset the theme. Didn't reset the game because we didn't segue. Okay, we did this instead of segueing. All right, what about this on the iPhone? Is this going to work on iPhone? Let's go over there and see. Okay, so let's go back. Well, actually, let's pick one here. Let's go like, here's our sports one. Now let's go back and try and change it to animals and see. Oh no, it didn't work. And why didn't it work? Because, oops, sorry. Okay, because we only can do this if we're in the split view controller that has a detail view controller. And on the iPhone, there is no detail in the split view controller. We use the navigation controller to get to it. So how would we fix this on an iPhone? Okay, well on an iPhone, what we're going to have to do is grab a hold of an MVC that we segue to and hold on to it with a strong pointer so that when it gets thrown off the navigation stack, it doesn't leave the heap. And we'll keep a hold of it. Then the next time someone wants to go to it, we will just put it straight on the navigation controller. We will not segue to it because that would reset it. We'll just push it right on there. And this will show you how we do navigation controller direct pushing and popping. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm just going to create a little private var here, which I'm going to call my last segued to concentration view controller, which is going to be a concentration view controller, optional. Okay? And I'm just going to set this anytime I successfully segue to something. So that becomes my last segued to concentration view controller. Right? So I'm just grabbing onto it right there. This is a normal var, so it's going to be a strong pointer to it. It's going to keep it in the heap. So even when we hit the back button, it'll get thrown off the navigation stack, but it'll stay in the heap, right? Pointed to by this var. And then over here, when we change theme, if I can't do the split view trick, then I'm going to say, else if I can let CVC equal that last segued to thing, then I'm just going to push it right onto the navigation stack. And remember how we do that from the slides? We just say the navigation controller I'm in, if I'm in one, dot push view controller, this last, or the CVC actually, animated, true. And let's make sure that we, of course, set its theme. Kind of copy and pasting code here, so we'll want to clean that up a little bit. But we'll set its theme here before we push. All right? So a lot going on here. You're learning about how to find things through a split view. You're learning how to hold something in the heap that gets thrown off of a navigation stack. You're learning how to push things on a navigation stack without segueing. And you're learning how to segue from code. Okay? All in this one method right here. So let's go see if this worked. All right, here we go. So we'll pick a theme like maybe animals. Here we go. It's looking good. Now let's go and change it to sports. Go back here. Sports. Woohoo! It worked. Because we didn't segue to it the second time. The first time we segued to it and we grabbed it. And then the next time we just pushed it on the navigation stack and set the theme. Okay, we could go back and set it to, sports. How about faces, animals? Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do, and this one's a little complicated, again, not complicated to implement, but just it's using some concepts like delegation here that you're not quite used to. But I'm going to make it so that when I run my iPhone version, it doesn't come up showing me a concentration game that has the default Halloween. Okay, I want it to come up showing this. So to do that, my theme chooser view controller here is going to make itself the delegate of the split view controller that it's in. Remember that even on iPhone, it's still in the SplitView controller, even though it doesn't show it as SplitView controller. Okay? Now, it turns out that one of the 10 or so SplitView delegate methods is one that controls whether it collapses what it calls the secondary view controller, which is the detail, whether it collapses it on top of the primary at any given time, okay, in the running of the app. So we're just going to implement that SplitView delegate method, and it returns a bool that says what to do, and we're just going to tell it to do the right thing. So how do we do that? Well, first we have to set ourselves as the SplitView controller's delegate. And I'm going to do that in that function awake from nib. I haven't had a chance to show you awake from nib. It's a function that's called on every object that comes out of your interface builder file. Here, you would never, extremely unlikely that you would ever build this whole SplitView navigation controller TabBar thing in code. Okay, that would be a lot of messy code. You're going to build it in a storyboard. So it's okay for me to do this little SplitView trick in awake from nib. I don't have to worry about this being created somewhere else. So I'm just going to tell my SplitView controller that I'm in, if I'm in one, to set its delegate to be myself, so that it will call that method about the collapsing on top of in me. Now, of course, it says you can't do this because it says self is not a UI SplitView controller delegate. So I have to go up here and announce that I am a UI SplitView controller delegate. And all the methods in there are optional. It's an Objective-C protocol, so I've implemented it. No warnings or errors, everything's good. But of course, I do need to actually implement one of them, which is that collapse. And I don't remember what it's called, but I know it has collapse in it. Here it is right here. It's this one. Okay, so I'll let you take a look at this guy. It's called UI View Controller collapse secondary onto primary view controller. Okay, and this secondary view controller is the detail. The primary view controller is the master. And it's basically asking here, hey, I'm adapting to the fact that I'm a split view controller on an iPhone, and I want to collapse the detail using a navigation controller on top of the primary, the master. Should I do it? Okay, and unfortunately, the return value of this seems like it should be true, do it, but actually, if we want to prevent this from happening, we return true. And the reason that happens is if you return false from this method, you're basically saying, I did not collapse this for you, so you do it. So the return value is kind of inverse. But the bottom line is, if we don't want that collapsing to happen, okay, we need to return true from this method. So when do we not want it to collapse? Well, we don't want it to collapse anytime that secondary view controller, that concentration game, has a nil theme. Okay, if it has a nil theme, then the theme has never been set. We don't want to do that collapse. So I'm just going to say here, if I can let CVC equal that secondary view controller as a concentration view controller, okay, then if the CVC's theme equals nil, okay, so it's never been set, then I'm going to return false. Otherwise, I'm just going to return true, which says to the system, true means, yes, please do that collapse for me. Oh, actually, it's the other way around. See, I always get confused. True and false. So true means I did it, but I'm actually not going to do it, so it's not going to get done. False means, no, I didn't collapse it, so you should do it. So it's very confusing. Even I get confused between this true and false, but this is the way it is. Okay? So that's a little complicated, a little bit of advanced use of delegation there, but let's see if it works. So when we first run, it worked, because that thing that it would normally have put on there had a nil theme. It was just using that default theme. But if I click, now it does collapse it on there because the theme is not nil. Okay, I set the theme to sports, right? So now it's a sports theme. Then we go back here, and now we're getting the reuse because we're not segueing. Okay? All right, so that's it. I showed you a lot of stuff about multiple MVCs there, right? So, you know, make sure you pile through this and understand it all, because you're going to be using it all pretty much in your next assignment right away. Okay, you're going to have to do pretty much all of this stuff in your next assignment. All right, let's jump back into the slides and get as far as we can here with this animation thing. I only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, so we probably won't get all the way through, but that's okay. We'll just continue on Wednesday. Any questions about that MVC stuff? I didn't see any raised hands. So, okay, timer. So timer, I'm talking about timer right before I talk about animation. Timer is not really used for animation. You wouldn't use a timer to do animation, but it sometimes is used in concert with animation. So I'm teaching it about the same time. Now, some of you actually used a timer in your extra credit, okay, for assignment 2, I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, assignment 2. And timer is a super simple little struct, very, very simple struct. It's basically made for you to give it a closure, okay, a little function, which will execute sometime in the future. Okay, you tell it how much, 2 seconds in the future, 10 seconds, a minute, an hour, it'll go and execute that code. And it can do it every hour if you want, or every 2 seconds, or it can just do it one time, okay? So how do we use timer? The easiest way to use timer is to use this class function on timer called scheduled timer. It only has 3 arguments. One is the time interval to wait until it executes it, whether it repeats it, keeps doing it, and the block of code, which is a simple little block that takes a timer as the argument and returns nothing. Okay? And it'll just execute that code. So it could not be simpler. So here's an example of it. I have this private week var, which is a timer. I'll explain why that's weak. This is the first time besides outlet that you've seen me use week. And I just set that timer var equal to the result of calling timer schedule timer. Here I'm doing time interval of 2 seconds, and it does repeat. So every 2 seconds, it's going to implement your code here. Okay? And every time it calls it, it passes the timer back to you so that you have it handy. I'm putting it in a var, so I wouldn't need it, but it's nice that it passes it there in case you don't want to store it around in a var. Now, why did I make that weak? Okay? I made it weak because as soon as that timer stops running, either because it wasn't a repeating timer or because someone stopped it from repeating, then no one else will have a strong pointer to it. So if I don't have a strong pointer to it, what will happen to this timer var? Get set to nil, which is great. Okay, so this timer var will automatically get set to nil as soon as this timer is stopped, which is a really nice feature. So I can always tell whether the timer is running by whether that thing is nil or not. So it's kind of a cool feature. So how do you stop a repeating timer? You got a timer that's going off every 2 seconds. Well, you just send the message invalidate to the timer, and it will no longer run. Okay? In fact, invalidate is going to throw it out of the heap and set weak vars to nil, and it's all going to be done. Okay? So that's it. Super easy to use class timer. Okay, struct timer. Now timer, sorry, I thought I didn't put this tolerance in here, but timer, you can also specify a tolerance on your timer. That just says if this timer goes off once an hour, it's okay if it goes off 30 seconds early or 30 seconds late. That's fine. And why would you want to set a tolerance? Because it could help the system be a little more battery efficient. Because the system might not be awake exactly 1 hour later. It might be sleeping, but it might wake up to check cellular status or something like that, and then it could run it. So if you give it a little tolerance, it won't have to wake up specifically to try and run your timer. By the way, these timers, even if you have tolerance 0, they don't run right on the microsecond of when you specify, okay? These are not microsecond level timers, okay? They're probably, I mean, in practice, they're probably 10th or 100th of a second very reliably, but these are not for real-time animation or something like that. Yeah, so the question is, can the timer run when the app is in the background? And we haven't talked about the whole application lifecycle and when things are in the background, and I will talk about that. But the answer is, once the thing has gone to the suspended state, no, nothing runs in your app. But in that 30 seconds where it's not fully, backgrounded, it could run in that short time. So we'll talk all about that when we talk about the application lifecycle, what happens to your app when you go to another app, for example. Okay, so brief overview here of the kinds of animation that exist in iOS, or at least some of the kinds. One is animating UI view properties. There's a few UI view properties, very important ones, which we'll talk about, that you can animate the changing of. Okay, this is the most common animation that goes on. Okay, and we'll talk all about that one. Then there's animating controller transitions. This is like you're in the navigation controller and a new card comes on top of the deck. Okay, the animation of that sliding in or popping in or flipping in or whatever, that can be animated. We're not going to talk anything about that. Okay, that's kind of an advanced animation topic. We're not going to talk about that. There's core animation that, just like there's CA layer underneath UI view for drawing, there's kind of core animation under this UI view property animation at the top there that I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to get into core animation much. It's basically the primitives for animating properties. It can animate more than just the UI view properties that I'm going to talk about, but I just don't have time to get down to that layer. Even for UI view property animation, I'm just going to kind of show you the real easy top way to do it. Most of this class is really just trying to get you introduced to things, and you can go look in more detail if you want to do more detailed stuff. If you're doing 3D, of course, there's full 3D animation engine, OpenGL, and also Metal, which is a fantastic system for doing that. I'm not going to talk about any 3D in this class either. So if you're a 3D person, presumably you might already know OpenGL, and you'll have to figure out how to get your OpenGL into a view on your own, but it's not actually that difficult. There's also SpriteKit, a whole framework for doing 2.5D animation, basically. That's like Mario Brothers kind of animation, right? Where you have images and they're overlapping to create what appears to kind of be a 3D world, but it's really drawn 2D, where the images just overlap. So there's a whole mechanism for that. Not going to talk about that either. Maybe we'll have a Friday section on that, possibly later in the quarter, but I doubt it, because we've got some other things on the in the pipe for that. And finally, there's dynamic animation. This is animating views using physics. So you give the view a mass and a velocity and an elasticity, and then you operate on it. You push it, for example, and it'll just start flying across the screen. And depending on what its mass is and what it collides with, it'll bounce around and do various things. This I am going to tell you about on Wednesday, okay? Because it's really great for kind of moving views on mass and having them interact with each other. Okay? When you slide up from the bottom on your iPhone and it kind of bounces a little bit, that's the dynamic animation, right? It's just kind of a little bit of elasticity and it bounces. Let's wait on UI view animation, because I don't want to rush this too much. So we'll start Wednesday off with this. UI view property animation is just these yellow properties right here on your view, like where it is, its center, or the transform. Remember the thing we did to rotate the view upside down when we made the corner of the card? Or alpha, how transparent it is, making things fade in and out, or the background color, which is rare to animate. These properties and these properties alone, you can animate so that your view can fly across screen, it can fade out, it can flip around because its transform can be changed, it can scale up and get big and then go back small because its scale of the transform scale can be changed, etc. So there's a whole API for animating these things, and that's what we'll start Wednesdays with, and then I'll do dynamic animation, then we'll do a demo. I'm going to be time constrained at that point, but we'll do a demo that includes all of that stuff, hopefully, in it. And then your assignment that's going to go out on Wednesday is to take your set game and add animation to it. Okay? And there's also going to be another part for multiple MVCs. All right? Sound good? All right, I'll see you next time.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.